achieved.
Welcome back to Kamikaze Overdrive MMA Predictions. As always, I am your host, Scott Johnson, and I'm on location today, actually recording this from the place that I watched my very first MMA event at. It's my mother and father-in-law's place. Opportunity to record my video here, so thank you very much, guys. And they're always listening, so I always appreciate the support, as I do from all of my listeners. Now, on this episode of the show, we're taking a look at the upcoming UFC 156 event, which will take place on February 2nd. I'll be providing 5 main card predictions on this episode. All of the preliminary picks will be available over at kamikazeoverdrive.net, so head over there and check them out. I'm coming off a 7-4 on UFC Fox event. It wasn't my best one, but certainly I've been 7-4, 8-3, 6-4. I can't remember the last time I lost more fights than I won. It's consistency. I've had some good nights, but I haven't had a perfect night in ages. But either way, I'm doing well. The betting packs had a lot of success. I nailed 4 or 5 confidence picks, 3 of 5 value picks, including my number 1 pick, Ricardo Lamas. I've now nailed Ricardo Lamas and Nick Lenz of my top value picks the last 2 shows, both coming in very well. So please consider looking at my value picks. They've been paying off pretty decently. There's some stats on the website if you want to check that out. And of course, you can always look at my past ones. I post them with every review. So please take a look there. I'm actually going to post a total value pack for $12, which will include everything from both the $10 and $5 value packs. So you're saving a couple bucks if you buy both of them. And so take a look at that as well. Also on the website, we have the prediction panel, guys, breaking down fights. You can check them out there, so please do so. Also, the public picks, make sure you get in and check them out. Now that we've got 4 or 5 events in the books, I keep all the stats posted so you can check out all the statistics and see how people were picking. And we finally got a main event right, at least the public did, in the last event. First time since I started keeping track of all the stats. But a lot of predictions to get to. That's enough for me right now. Let's get into my first main card prediction. Our first prediction comes in the UFC's Flyweight division as former title challenger José Benavidez, 16-3-0, battles former number 1 ranked Flyweight Ian Uncle Creepy McCall, 11-3-1. Both fighters are coming off decision losses to Demetrius Johnson. Benavidez losing in the tournament finals. Ian McCall losing in the tournament semifinals. First thing I want to talk about in this matchup is the wrestling. Both guys are known for their grappling and very impressive numbers and success of late. McCall, very good wrestler, excellent takedown defense. Demetrius Johnson has great takedowns, went 2 for 12 trying to get McCall on his back. Dominic Cruz, when they fought at bantamweight, 0 for 4. Now Benavidez, not the most impressive numbers actually when it comes to takedown completion percentage at 22%, and he went 0 for 7 against Demetrius Johnson, which is it's an interesting aspect when he doesn't have that speed advantage that he's used to at bantamweight. How effective is his grappling? Now Ian McCall, 2 for 6 against Dominic Cruz offensively, looking for takedowns, and went 5 for 20 against Demetrius, including 4 of 9 in the first fight, which is very impressive. Now, José Benavidez, much better takedown defense with 49%, but again, Demetrius Johnson, 5 takedowns, and I keep going back to these guys against Johnson because they're both a common opponent. They've both fought recently, so it's interesting to see how they stacked up in those fights and compare them together. McCall, excellent timing on his takedowns, hooks up a double underhooks and inside trip. Multiple times against Johnson, was able to catch the leg or the knee and trip him, belly-to-back suplex. Really uses that wrestling and size advantage he has at flyweight very well. On the mat, was able to hold top position, cut through DJ's guard, held a back mount late in the fight, and looked very good doing it. And Johnson's not an easy guy to keep down. José Benavidez, he's an alpha male fighter. A lot of guys like Faber and Mendez, a lot of good grapplers coming out of that camp, so he's got some excellent guys to work with when it comes to the ground game. Best takedown performance of late was a 5 for 17 mark against Ian Loveland, but other than that, far and few between him putting up big takedown numbers as far as completions. A lot of attempts, not a lot of success actually putting guys on their back. Against Johnson, he was shooting from the outside with very limited success, and he was having a lot of trouble against Yasuhiro Urashitani to get the fight to the ground, going 1 for 5. I think it's a speed issue, at least going down a flyweight, that he isn't used to, or wasn't at least used to then. We'll see if he's worked on that to improve things. Switching things to, so I give McCall the ground advantage as far as that is concerned. Flipping over to the striking aspect, again, Ian McCall lands 3.39 strikes per minute compared to 2.66 for José Benavidez. With McCall, he was standing and trading with Johnson, showed good footwork, heavy leg kicks, and he clipped Johnson with some nice combinations and an uppercut. Something to keep notice of. Now, he didn't look nearly as quick in the second fight because he was focusing on throwing power, and he was more flat-footed, and that's something you don't want to do against a guy like Benavidez because José Benavidez has very big power as well. He moves forward. He will swing wildly a little bit, but when he's on he uses a left jab to set up his strikes, and he loads up with power, but he does telegraph his strikes a little bit much. So if McCall is able to realize that and recognize that, he should be able to avoid some big shots. Again, he struggled landing strikes against Johnson and against Cruz, too, when he fought for the bantamweight title. Again, I attribute that to the footwork and speed advantage of his opponents, and I think McCall should have a speed advantage over Benavidez in this fight. And I said he has good power. He will attack in flurries. When he fought Eddie Wineland, he was a very good striker. He busted him open. He throws nice slicing punches, and we saw the power he had against in the semifinals when he scored the knockout win there. He throws a nice front leg body kick, very limited wind-up. He uses it to try and limit the mobility of his opponent and throw some nice low kicks. He has some power behind. Now, I look at McCall. He should have more success against Benavidez than he did against Johnson because he's the faster fighter and he's the more technical striker when compared to Benavidez. But he needs to use his speed and not focus as much on power. Benavidez hasn't gained much of a size advantage by dropping down to 125, and he's actually the shorter fighter here. He might have a little bit of strength on his side, but he's lost that speed advantage that made him very effective at 135 pounds. And I'm going to call the upset in this fight. I'm going to take Ian McCall to defeat José Benavidez by decision. Our next prediction is in the UFC's welterweight division is Jon Fitch, 27-4-1 with 1 no contest. Battles former 185er Demian Maia at 17-4-0. Fitch is coming off a very impressive decision victory over Eric Silva at UFC 153, while Demian Maia at the same event defeated Rick Story by submission, which was by a neck crank, and is now 2-0 since dropping down to welterweight. Now this is a matchup of 2 grappling-based fighters. Maia, a 4th-degree BJJ black belt, Fitch, an NCAA Division I wrestler. So both 2 guys that are very good on the ground. Now, I'm only going to touch briefly on the striking. Both guys are working to improve the striking. I give the slight edge to Fitch. Maia's a little bit wild. We really haven't seen him strike because he's got back to his base since dropping to welterweight, and that's where he needs to focus this fight, is on getting to the ground. And we might actually see Fitch using his wrestling in reverse if he can to keep the fight standing and avoid the ground game where Maia is so dangerous. Now, as I said, Maia much more aggressive at 170 with his grappling. He's only had 2 short fights, though, very limited defensive work, and, as I said, hardly any striking, so we have a big question about his cardio if his opponent's able to defend his early rush. Now, he appears to be much stronger at 170 pounds, and he's not undersized like he was at 185, which should have an impact on his performance. Against Rick Story, he dropped in a single leg very quickly, elevated that leg, and took him down, and Story's a very powerful wrestler, and he had a lot of success against Dong Young Kim. I know that fight finished with an injury, but Kim has an 81% takedown defense, and Maia just plowed through him and put him on his back. Became very good with his judo, so very impressive as far as I'm concerned with Demian Maia's takedown ability. Now, he likes to work along the cage, ties up legs very effectively, takes away a base of his opponents, moved to mount against Story, kept advancing his position using overhooks and underhooks, and just whatever he could to tie him up, eventually getting to his back and locking in that rear naked choke. Very impressive. Now, Fitch, he's an aggressive, grinding wrestler, excellent control from top position, and just destroys his opponent. 51% takedown accuracy, lands 3.83 takedowns per fight, went 6 of 9 against Eric Silva, 9 of 11 against Thiago Alves, so capable of putting up a lot of takedowns and he's very hard to defend against. Now, Jon Fitch is very difficult to finish as well. He survived some very tough positions against both BJ Penn and Eric Silva. But Fitch has had trouble in the past when opponents aggressively engage him in grappling. GSP went 7 of 9 in takedowns. We saw Penn go 2 for 3, and Eric Silva went 2 for 3 as well. Now, BJ and Silva had him in some very bad positions. They both took his back, and I said Fitch survived those positions, but it had a lot to do with the fact that BJ was undersized and gassing, and Silva was gassing. So Fitch credit, but it's not like he was doing it against a fully healthy, 100% athlete at that point in time. Now, with the success that Maia's had against Kim and Story getting the fight to the ground, how aggressively he went after, and the struggles Fitch has had against Penn and Silva, and I'm going to exclude GSP because he's GSP, Maia should be able to put Fitch in similar situations and in trouble, and if Fitch just gets put on his back with a guy like Demian Maia on top, that's not a good thing. Maia needs to either finish him very quickly, which he's very capable of, or win the first 2 rounds of this fight and survive the third if he does start to gas or slow down and not get beaten 10-8 like BJ did, forcing the draw. Fitch looked much better in his last fight with a new aggressive style, but that actually could cost him here if he makes mistakes. This is the biggest test for Demian Maia at 170 pounds, but I'm going to take Demian Maia to defeat Jon Fitch by submission. Our next fight is in the UFC's heavyweight division as former Strikeforce champion Alistair the Ream Overeem, 36-11-1, battles Antonio Bigfoot Silva, 17-4-0, in a matchup that was scheduled to take place in the Strikeforce Grand Prix tournament semifinals, but never did, as Antonio Silva took on Daniel Cormier instead. Overeem is coming off a victory over Brock Lesnar, while Antonio Silva a knockout win against Travis Brown. And now Overeem's been out of action for almost 13 months because of a suspension, so he's going to have a little bit of ring rust coming back in. With these big guys, it could take him a little bit to get going. Now, physically, they're both the same size. Usually they have a slight size or strength advantage. There's a slight reach edge going to Bigfoot in this matchup. I would say speed advantage goes to Overeem, but conditioning actually goes on the side of Antonio Silva, and if that fight ends early, obviously that won't come into effect. Overeem's a K1 level kickboxer. Silva, BJJ, judo, and karate black belt, so very versed in a lot of different disciplines. Now, the biggest attributes these two guys bring to this cage, Silva has a very heavy top game. We saw it against Fedor Emelianenko, we saw it against McCall, Alistair Overeem, striker, excellent combinations, big kicks, big knees, and just big power. Now, looking at Silva first, he used the wall for his takedowns against Brown and Andrei Arlovsky. He pushed him into the wall and controlled him there. 1.39 takedowns per fight, 42% completion rate. Now, Overeem has a 77% takedown defense rate, but he wanted nothing to do with that. Fabricio Verdum on the ground, he's been submitted a couple of times. That's an area and stopped via TKO also on the mat. He does not want to go to the ground with Bigfoot if he can avoid it. Now, Overeem's striking, he has excellent combinations, big time body punches, big power, knees in close, and kicks like we saw against Brock Lesnar. And he's a very confident striker. And Silva struggled when he fought Daniel Cormier with the hand speed of Cormier, and eventually was put to sleep, and that's, something Overeem's going to look to do, is test that big old chin of Antonio Silva. Now, Fabricio Verdum was having a lot of success with his striking against Overeem, outlanded him 64 to 46, especially at close range using the dirty boxing, but he was focused more on getting the fight to the ground. I think he could have had more success with the striking had he remained, focused in that area. Now, Silva, he's actually a pretty decent striker. He uses a nice high guard, which I really like. He defends and parries punches away and then returns fire with a nice straight right. He landed several times against Travis Brown, including the shot that knocked him out. And, he won a striking-based matchup with Andrei Arlovsky, used a lot of pressure, combinations, leg kicks, countering him with that right hand, and he dropped Fabricio Verdum early in that fight as well. Now, Overeem, he doesn't use a lot of footwork. He stands directly in front of his opponent, and, if he throws kicks, they could lead to a takedown. So those are things he needs to avoid, is standing directly in front of Bigfoot, being a stationary target for both striking and if Antonio wants to take him to the ground. Now, as far the way I view it, Antonio Silva has the skills to at least hang with Overeem on the feet. Probably not beat him with his striking, but certainly stay with him. But Overeem, he's got a lot of submission wins, to tell you the truth, more than Silva, but I don't think he wants to go to the ground with Antonio Silva. That's an area he does not want to compete with him there. Overeem is undefeated in 12 fights, but only has one real significant win in that span against Fabricio Verdum. His other wins came over Brock Lesnar, who was at the end of his career, a late notice defeat over Duffy, guys like James Thompson and Brett Rogers. Not exactly top-name competition. Well, Antonio Silva, he's fought much more impressive list of opponents. Travis Brown, Cain Velasquez, Daniel Cormier, Fedor, Andrei Arlovsky, Mike Kyle, Fabricio Verdum, and he's had mixed success, but at least he's competing at the top level. Now, Overeem has been stopped on the ground before, and he tapped to punches versus Ricardo Arona at light heavyweight. Now, that's something if Antonio Silva can get on top and establish that top game. Overeem needs to keep at distance, but if Silva lands that big right, he could be in trouble, because, Overeem, we haven't seen him really blasted with a big shot in a long time, so we'll have to see how his chin holds up. This isn't kickboxing, as Antonio Silva said. It's the small gloves. You get one big punch from heavyweight, and you could be in big-time trouble. I expect Silva to try and use the cage to control Overeem, take him down, grind on him, test that conditioning, and potentially look to land some ground and pound. I'm going to pull the upset here, and I'm going to take Antonio Bigfoot Silva to defeat Alistair Overeem by TKO. Our co-main event prediction comes in the UFC's light heavyweight division as former champion Sugar Rashad Evans, 22-2-1, returns to action against Antonio Rogério Nogueira, better known as Little Nog, 20-5-0. Evans' last fight came at UFC 145 as a title fight loss to John Jones, when Little Nog last fought at UFC 140 and was victorious over former champion Tito Ortiz. Now, as I said, Nog hasn't fought in a long time. December 2011, so about 13 months, and he's 36 years of age, so both the ring rust and age could start impacting his career at any point in time. It could show up here. Now, Nogueira, very dangerous off his back and on the mat. 6 wins by submission. Excellent wrist control. And when he fought Phil Davis, he gave Davis, who's a wrestler, a lot of trouble off his back. And even when Davis, tried to get him down, it was very difficult. Both guys are very good strikers. Stats are very close. Strikes landed per minute, accuracy, strikes absorbed per minute, and defense almost identical in all situations. There's really no discernible edge for either fighter. Excellent boxing for Nogueira. Good combinations and significant power. We saw him knock out Louise Kane, and he landed knee strikes, taking out both Vladimir Matyushenko outside of the UFC and Tito Ortiz in his last fight. Now, speed could be an issue, and that favors Rashad Evans. Absolutely, in that category, Evans has a speed and quickness advantage. His striking is constantly improving, and working with the Black Zillions and Tyron Spong, very impressive there, and I really like what I see with Rashad Evans. I really think he could be the second best light heavyweight in the division. This would be a good test of that theory, anyway. And now, one thing Evans does very well, he uses his strikes to set up his takedowns. He will flurry with combos and duck under, and again, that comes back to the speed, and that gives a lot of people, a lot of difficulty dealing with that combination of, striking and takedowns. Now, he stopped Tito Ortiz with a knee TKO. He TKO'd Forrest Griffin. We saw him take out Chuck Liddell with a big KO. He might not have the power that people at first believed when he stopped Chuck Liddell, because they weren't seeing what was happening to Chuck at that point in time. But still, he's a very dangerous striker. Now, one thing he has to be very mindful of is he has a tendency to get clipped. He got clipped against Rampage and Thiago Silva late in those fights and nearly got stopped, nearly cost him those matchups that he was clearly winning. And like we saw Machida blast him and almost and put him away, so he needs to be very careful because Nogueira could hurt him and finish him. He's a very competent boxer. Now Evans on the ground, NCAA Division I wrestler and a BJJ black belt versus Nogueira, who's a third-degree black belt and is a Brazilian boxing champion, so very versed in multiple disciplines as well. Nog has a lot of experience with wrestlers fighting in the UFC. He fought Jason Brills, who he defeated. Brills went 3 for 13 on takedowns. That was a very close and controversial fight. He fought Ryan Bader, who he lost to. Bader 5 for 16. And he lost to Phil Davis, who was 4 of 11 in takedowns. And he beat Tito Ortiz, who was 0 for 1 in takedowns. So certainly a 2-2 against wrestling-based fighters anyway. Now, Nog is working on his takedown defense, had a lot of time at Black House working with Mark Munoz, and he gave Phil Davis a lot of trouble. Davis could not get that fight to the ground for the longest time. He was pressuring and attacking Nogueira, but he still could not get it there. Nogueira has a takedown defense of 65%. That's impressive considering the opposition he has faced. Now, Rashad Evans, equally as impressive stats, 3.7 takedowns per fight, completes 53%. Against Phil Davis, he put him on his back 3 times. Took on 4 attempts, took Rampage down 3 times, and went 8 of 16 against Thiago Silva. He really mixes up his grappling very well and keeps guys off balance. I would say of all the people Nogueira's faced, even Phil Davis, who's a very decorated wrestler, Rashad Evans has the best mix of striking and wrestling, and that'll give Nogueira a lot of difficulty. Nogueira needs to use his movement to set up both his strikes, Rashad needs to use his movement to set up both his strikes and takedowns. Don't allow Nog to control his wrists and arms on the ground. Again, watch for that big shot. Well, Nog needs to use his footwork, land combinations, and defend takedowns. And if he gets Rashad finished, do what Rampage and Thiago Silva couldn't do and finish him. But I don't think it's going to happen. So my prediction is Rashad Evans to defeat Little Nog by decision. Our final prediction of the evening comes to us in the featherweight division as champion José Aldo, 21-1-0, defends his title against former lightweight champion Frankie the Answer Edgar, 14-3-1 in a legitimate super fight. José Aldo coming off a win over Chad Mendes at UFC 142, while Frankie Edgar back-to-back title fight losses to Benson Henderson. And, I believe he should have won, actually should still have the title after UFC 150. I felt he won that fight, even though I picked Benson. Now, this will be Edgar's debut at 145, so certainly an intangible there. But Aldo's been out of action for a year, and he could have some ring rust. We'll see how, those two factors play out. Aldo actually still has a size advantage over Edgar, 5'7" to 5'6", and I feel he's the slightly larger fighter to begin with. Now, statistically, Aldo lands more strikes per minute at 3.55 to 3.32, and he also gets hit less per minute, 1.81 to 2.13 for Edgar. So that's very interesting to take note of. Now, the takedowns, that could be a very telling battle in this matchup. Edgar lands 2.73 takedowns per fight. Now, only 37% takedown accuracy, but still, when he gets his takedowns, he knows what to do with them. José Aldo, 95% takedown defense. So very impressive. Aldo has never been taken down more than 1 time in a fight in his WEC or UFC career. Only 3 times in his 11-fight career has he been taken down at least once. Chad Mendes, he's fought very good grapplers. Chad Mendes, Uriah Faber, Matt Brown, Kenny Florian, judo fighter Manny Gambirian have combined for a 1 for 42 mark. Kenny Florian, 1 takedown and 19 opportunities out of that group. So it's very impressive to see how Aldo keeps the fight standing. Those Nova União guys are so good at defending takedowns from wrestlers or grapplers. Now, Aldo, brutal leg kicks. That's going to be a factor too. And we saw what he did in the Faber fight. And Edgar had trouble with Henderson's leg kicks, and it really limited his mobility. And that's one of Edgar's biggest weapons. And if Aldo takes it away from him in the first or second round with those leg kicks, it's really going to take away or diminish Frankie's ability to win this fight, period. Aldo has very fast combinations, excellent stepping knee, big power, 13 wins by knockout. We saw him hurt Mark Hominick. He really only needs to land once, as we saw as the case in the Chad Mendes matchup. Now, the big question is, could Aldo use takedowns? He went 5 for 9 versus Hominick, but Edgar has good takedown defense, and he did it against guys like Gray Maynard and Ben Henderson. I could see Aldo maybe attempting one, but at the same time, if he doesn't, will not shock me whatsoever. Now, this is Edgar's debut at 145. Now, his power and strength need to translate well to this division for him to have an advantage. He does have knockout power. We saw what he did to Gray Maynard. He hurt Ben Henderson a couple of times, but those two things need to become a big factor in here, and it needs to help him out, especially with his takedowns and his wrestling. The drawback to this coming to this division is he gives up his speed advantage. His endurance and his pace are not nearly as big an advantage, and neither is his striking output. And on top of all this, his body becomes more fragile. He's fighting faster fighters who have just as good a conditioning, if not better, and that's a huge disadvantage. The conditioning edge might not be an issue against Aldo if the fight even gets to that stage. Now, Edgar had success versus Maynard and Penn because he was faster and more active. That is complete. As I said, that's gone now. That's not going to be something he's going to have at his power at UFC in the 145-pound weight division. Now, he did well against Ben Henderson, but not nearly as well in other fights because the speed and endurance weren't on his side. Henderson was just as good in those categories. He should have fought. I feel he should have fought at 145 at least once before fighting the best fighter in the division, and I think that shows up here. Edgar's chin, he has a lot of heart, but he's been clipped and hurt before, and Aldo has the power to hurt him. Maynard hurt him twice, Benson hurt him with an upper kick, and as I said, Aldo could put him away if he lands. Aldo's conditioning is an issue. Aldo has had trouble making the weight at 145, and he's been out of action for a year, and he's slowed late versus Hominick, but again, there were some issues there. Also, if Edgar can push him, we could see that show up again. Hominick's striking was very limited by Aldo's speed advantage. Hominick had a lot of trouble getting in and landing combinations, and the same thing could be said if Frankie Edgar can't deal with it. We've seen faster fighters, especially going down to the flyweight division for 135, struggle with that speed change. I think that's going to show up here with Frankie Edgar as well. Edgar either has to, have KO power or needs to push the pace early, use takedowns, avoid getting clipped, and outwork Aldo and hope he tires late and put him away then, or at least win a decision. Aldo, for him to win, defend the takedowns like he always does, blast those leg kicks like he always does, and use his speed to limit Edgar's offense and land with power. I think the champion retains his title, so my prediction is José Aldo defeat Frankie Edgar by TKO. So those are my main card predictions for UFC 156. All the preliminaries available at kamikazeoverdrive.net. For the bet packs, they're doing well. A lot of the times when I lose fights, in the bet packs I'm able to recognize these are the fights that I'm at risk at. These are the fights you want to limit your investment in. I think they're decent investments based on value or skill, but I'm not saying they're rock solid picks because they are vulnerable in these areas. So certainly take a look there. Head over to the website, vote in the public picks, check out the other predictions from the other predictors of the website. I always appreciate everyone's support and comments. Thank you very much for tuning in. We get a couple weeks off before the next event, and I look forward to taking a little break. So again, thank you very much. Kamikaze Overdrive MMA Predictions.